I've spent quite a lot of time over the last few years looking at how you can use virtualization such that when you click to open an email attachment or something like that, you can create a virtual machine. You perform that operation within the virtual machine, and it's transparent from an end user point of view. But that virtual machine is going to have access to just the resources that are needed for that task and no more. It won't have access to any of your other documents or credentials, password hashes, etc. And it's going to exist just for the life of that task. And then when that task finishes, we're going to dispose of it. And, hence discarding anything bad that's happened within that virtual machine.
These days, there are endpoints for devices all over the place. Trying to constantly detect security threats seems like a losing strategy. It's like running a race, but always being behind despite best efforts. If detection ends up being a losing strategy, then what's a winning one? Dr. Ian Pratt, the global head of security for personal systems at HP, explains how virtual machines can mitigate threats. Enjoy this episode. IT Visionaries is powered by the Salesforce platform. If this episode made you want to go deeper into the data security world, check out salesforce.com/data security and download the IT guide to data security and governance to learn how to protect your customer data with Salesforce Security Portfolio. Welcome everyone to another episode of IT Visionaries, and today we have a special guest. We have a special guest. His name is Dr. Ian Pratt, and he is the global head of security at a small company called HP. You might have heard of it. Ian, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Albert.
For anyone who doesn't know what HP is, which I don't think there is, but just in case, if you could, please let our audience know, what is HP, and specifically, what is your role at HP?
So HP has obviously been around a long time as one of the real founders of Silicon Valley, starting out in the garage. And today, obviously, we make a lot of endpoint devices, desktops, laptops, printers, things like that. And my role at HP is as global head of security for personal systems. So I'm responsible for the security of the products that we build, both the hardware and then the software and services that we provide on top of that.
One of the things that we've done when we do a little homework on all of our guests is we see that you do a lot of publications and you speak on behalf of HP, specifically about what's going on, especially with the modern workforce, how hybrid work is here. There's more endpoint devices everywhere. You kind of hit it right before in your intro. HP makes not only the computers, but the printers and other devices. And many, many people are having more and more devices, connected devices at different endpoints, different places, offices, home offices, shared offices, corporate, on-prem. What is happening in your world right now that's making, that you have to address this challenge? Because obviously we understand there's multiplication of devices, but give us an idea of how fast things are changing in your world and what's the major challenge of securing all these devices?
Well, obviously, over the last couple of years, what we've seen happen is people take their devices, which were sitting on corporate networks, and we're getting the benefit of the protections provided by those networks, pick them up, and then take them home and work from home. And for many companies, that's obviously been a big challenge. Those that weren't prepared for it, but in many ways, it's not much different from what was happening to support remote workers, traveling workers, and things like that before. And so what we've really seen over the last couple of years, and there's an acceleration of various trends which were already happening, but now they're very much mainstream. And in this world where endpoints are out of the office, we really need them to be more autonomous, to be able to defend themselves, to not rely on those devices on the enterprise network. And we also need them to be resilient so that if something does go wrong, we can always get that device back to a known good state, to get the user back up and running again quickly, and be able to do that without having to send the machine off or help desk visits or anything like that. It all has to be able to be done remotely and quickly. So those have been some of the challenges, but also obviously the bad guys are taking advantage of the situation. There are a lot more attacks happening year on year. That's something trends we've been seeing for years, and the level of sophistication of those attacks goes up as well. So it is a challenging time for everybody in security. And I think the endpoint in particular, if you look at the stats of how enterprise breaches happen, how they get started, and over 70% of them, in fact, I saw a survey recently from Veritas saying it was 91%, but in many breaches, the point of entry is an endpoint. It's some poor user, clicking on something, effectively inviting the attackers onto their device, and then that's the beachhead that the attackers use to move around the enterprise, and that's why endpoint security is so important for enterprise security.
Yeah, that makes total sense. We've had a couple guests that have been on our show talking on this subject, talk about how that what you just described, which is the endpoint is actually the weakest link. It used to be because everyone was on a secure network, you had to break into the network, you had to break into the servers, and then you could infiltrate that way. Now people are figuring out new ways to come in through the endpoints. You made a comment earlier in that in the conversation about how you're looking. The future you think is going to be more resilience at the device, software enabled, being able to recognize. It sounds like recognize attacks potentially. Give us an idea of how fast that's shifting, because I remember, of course, not too long ago having to work in an office like many others where, you had to sign on, you had to be on that closed encrypted network. Like when you took your device off network, it didn't really work that great. And then most people didn't mix. They also didn't mix their personal and their work computer. You kind of had two, right? You worked on your office machine and you worked at home on your home machine. But that's really blending now when, my wife, for example, she works at Cisco. She got issued all this equipment and stuff like that. Of course, they don't change our router. They don't give us a firewall. They don't give us those things. And she's using public internet to work at Cisco. Give us an idea of what that means and how fast the technology has to evolve. What's the difference in the technology that has to go into the machine to protect it in this manner?
Yeah, well, if you think about it, working from home with your enterprise corporate device on your home network really wasn't much different from the traveling worker that happened to be staying in a hotel, perhaps in a foreign country, having to use the hotel Wi-Fi and things like that. So, a lot of the solutions to these problems have been known about for a while. It's really the fact that everybody is doing it now, that it's now the normal way of approaching things. And it really should be the case that the security of your device shouldn't be dependent on the security of the network it's connected to. We want the devices to be autonomous, able to defend themselves. And so, if there was a problem on the home network, it shouldn't be an issue if we've got things set up correctly.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. And for yourself, how do you see it? Like, I guess what keeps you up at night? What do you see the biggest needs for innovation in home security or endpoint security needing to be? Because you mentioned earlier also that attacks are getting more sophisticated too. Where are you seeing the biggest needs for innovation, development, investment in the short term as well as the next 5 years?
One of the things is that the way that attackers are trying to get in, at a high level hasn't really changed for quite a while, because it's targeting the endpoint, it's targeting that intersection of fallible humans and vulnerable technology. Still, the most common ways is sending somebody an email, getting them to click on something, clicking on an attachment, clicking on a link in email, or perhaps download something from the web. It's the actual vulnerability that they may be exploiting is changing all of the time. But the general approach of social engineering someone to click, to invite them onto their machine, to then exploit vulnerabilities, and the ways that they do that really haven't changed. And that's obviously there are a lot of different approaches which organizations are trying to try and prevent that from compromising their machines. The first line of defense is obviously user training, encouraging people to look at things before they click. But we know that as the sophistication of attacks goes up, the lures for encouraging people to click get more and more convincing. And so we've actually seen click rates go up over the last year or two because the lures have got better. Some of that is actually being done by attackers using machine learning, machine generation technologies to create convincing lures. Based out of having compromised one machine, they'll look through the inbox of the user, find out who they're communicating with, some cases even search the directory to figure out, what roles those users have in the organization, or perhaps in different companies, and then reply to existing email threads. So very difficult for anybody to, in fact, impossible to know that that's not a legitimate, email. It might be an existing document that has been, attached, had malware added to it, and then attached to that thread. And because people are clicking, you're then reliant on the security tools that you have on the machine. If it's got via through the email gateway, that email's got to the machine, the users then clicked on some attachment, and the challenge there is that again, because the attackers are well organized, they have access to all of the various security products and tools, and just view it as part of the QA process for their malware to run it through the lab, make sure it gets a clean bill of health, so they can have that confidence that in the first few hours, perhaps days, or sometimes even weeks, when they release some fresh piece of malware, it's not going to be spotted by detection-based approaches to security. Even ones using sophisticated machine learning, because they're, in some cases, using machine generation tricks on the other side to generate those pieces of malware specifically to avoid the machine learning. So it's a real arms race that's taking place, fueled by the very large amounts of money that the bad guys are making. That's why the sophistication has gone up, because there's a lot of money to be made, and they're organized. There's you have these criminal supply chains, these organizations that work together to improve the quality of attacks that we're seeing.
That's kind of scary hearing that, obviously, because you are correct. You're only as strong as your weakest link. You can't if something slips through the gates and someone clicks it and installs the software or the malware, it is going to start beginning. You are reliant on software to recognize these things, and they themselves are also trying to combat that. How do you envision this battle playing out? Is it going to constantly be this race of like reaction? Do we get to a place where software gets so smart that it can actually recognize that this is a potential piece of malware? Because I saw this thing that you wrote about how like something like 29% of malware captured right now is previously unknown. So, obviously a developer can't program a resistance to something it doesn't recognize. Do you see like AI or possibly something being a part of the solution where it can recognize that this is malware or a virus or something nefarious?
Well, people have been using machine learning techniques for a long time. Even the so-called legacy AV vendors are all using machine learning in their products. There's it's approach which everyone has to use because signatures and hashes and things like that have long since stopped being effective. But that certainly helps. It gives you the ability to do a sort of fuzzy match against against something suspicious, trying to identify it as malware. But these approaches are never going to get you to 100%. In fact, they're barely getting us to 90%, and certainly ineffective for anything which is fresh, not necessarily sophisticated, just fresh malware, which has been tweaked sufficiently and tested so that it's going to evade detection. And I think that's a key thing. If we're always taking a detection-based approach, trying to spot things that are bad, we're always kind of going to be behind the game, because it's just a case of how quickly you can catch up and update your model of what is bad to then be able to block it. So I think the interesting approaches going forwards are the ones where we're dealing with classes of attack, where you're not worrying about individual vulnerabilities. You're saying we're going to deal with this this class attack, whether it's attachments coming in via email or web risks of web browsing, etc., and then really using a different approach that doesn't rely on detection, whether that's detection at the time the attack happens, sort of the traditional AV or NGAV approach, or even if you're relying on post-breach detection, whether it's EDR or MDR techniques of trying to spot that something bad has happened after the fact, you're always going to be behind. So I think approaches where you can mitigate the threat, and that's an area where we have a lot of focus of looking at how we can make it such that the you're rendering the malware harmless. Stopping its ability to hurt you. You're not relying on having to detect it. You're containing the threat, and I think approaches like that, and then using sort of isolation to stop that movement, to stop, so that you can control what you're putting at risk, so that you can stop attacks from spreading. These are going to be the approaches that end up winning out, I think.
Give our audience an example of how this could potentially work, because
Sure.
we kind of get, I think a lot of us, when you say detection, that makes sense, but like it sounds like you're talking about systemic design almost that prevents malware from spreading. That's what when I hear you, I think of like engineering, how boats are engineered that if one side's compromised, that the whole boat doesn't sink, right? It's like try to isolate the damage to one area. It sounds like that's what you're saying. I'd love for you to further explain this concept of isolation or preventing malware to actually take down a whole system, even if it gets through.
Sure. So, there have been a set of design principles which have been around for a long time. And, the ideas around, reducing attack surface, mandatory access controls, strong fine-grained isolation, strong identity of user and devices, and critically least privilege. These are ideas that have been around for a long time, being used to build really security critical systems, and been proven to show the test of time. And collectively, the term zero trust has emerged over the last few years to refer to some of these ideas, and we see zero trust applied to networking, where rather than just having the concept of a device being connected to a corporate network, you're actually looking at it on a far more fine-grained basis about which service is being accessed right now. Can we identify the user? Can we identify the device? And then limiting it just to that. That's the implementation of least privilege. But you can also apply those same principles to the endpoint itself. And so for example, one of the things which I've spent quite a lot of time over the last few years looking at how you can use virtualization such that when you click to open an email attachment or something like that, you create a virtual machine, you perform that operation within the virtual machine, and it's transparent from an end user point of view. But that virtual machine is going to have access to just the resources that are needed for that task and no more. It won't have access to any of your other documents or credentials, password hashes, etc. And it's going to exist just for the life of that task. And then when that task finishes, we're going to dispose of it. And, hence discarding anything bad that's happened within that virtual machine. So if you think about that, that means that when you click to open that email attachment, you're not putting anything at risk. There's nothing to steal. There's no way for the attacker to move laterally. And then there's no way for the attacker to persist, because as soon as I close the document, the VM is disposed of. And so through that kind of approach, you are able to deal with whole classes of malware that happen to be coming in via that vector. You're not having to worry about individual vulnerabilities or making sure that you're patched for them, even, or even worrying about detecting particular threats. They're going to be contained regardless, and you can do that without really changing the user experience. It should be transparent to the end user.
Okay, so this idea that when I open an email, for example, that I would spin up a virtual machine, it's very foreign to me because I've not heard of this possible solution. Is this a common practice, or is this something that still is going to take a lot of time and infrastructure development for that's a common practice that companies take? Or
I wouldn't say
utilize?
It's a common practice today, but it's certainly a growing practice. I mean, I started, or co-founded a company a few years ago to develop some of this technology, and that company was acquired by HP. And I've been at HP for a number of years now. And one of the key things which we wanted to do was to bring that technology to the mainstream. Beforehand, most of our customers were government, intelligence community, aerospace, defense. But now, since we've been at HP, we've been able to offer it to small businesses, mid-size as well as enterprise, and now have many millions of users, using the software every day. And they've, in the course of using their machines, opened, over, I think it's over 10 billion now, it's rather more than that now, various documents and web pages and other things which were risky activities, and they've opened in VMs and they've been protected. And during that whole time, we've had 0 reported breaches of anything escaping from one of those containers and being able to harm the machine. So it's an approach which gets you to a radically better security posture than you could do through just detection alone.
How far away do you see more mainstream adoption? Is this something that we're going to see, like, for example, to personal computers, you think, in the next 10 years? Because this, I mean, it makes total sense. You're opening attachments or things that you're not familiar with, your systems aren't familiar with, in complete VMs. It's completely detached from your computer. Even, I mean, I could see how this works for just me personally, right? Like, if I had access to this, I would want that because it makes it simple. Because think of how many emails we as people get every day from different vendors, different things. We just don't know. We really don't know what it is, especially if it's like a first time going to a business. You see a transactional email, you just we assume that it's fine. We don't really know. How far away is having virtualized machines for everybody to open up in email systems? How far away are we from that?
It's certainly something that we provide with all of our commercial machines today. A basic version, and then have more sort of a pro version for SMB and an enterprise version for larger organizations. But you can just download a single copy, buy a single copy from the web, and I know for a fact that it's a lot of consumers that are buying that, even though it's the pro version. It certainly is getting used in the consumer space. I actually think the majority of customers, maybe at least by number of customers as opposed to number of devices. In terms of actually becoming pervasive in the consumer realm, well, I could see that happening over time. It's there's always a trickle down of technologies in security. It starts with the people that have the biggest problem, which is always government, aerospace, defense, and then trickles down to finance, mainstream enterprise, SMB, and then consumer. That's the way these things always flow.
Well, I guess in order for it to really flow to consumer, it's just got to be part of your OS, I feel like. Because consumers notoriously, we're an interesting group at the consumer level, right? So if I were to buy an HP machine for myself, right, I want maybe a specific price point I'm willing to pay for. We already know, like, a lot of consumer software, people just think, like for example, apps. Apps cost $1. They don't want to download it. But I can see this becoming part of OSs all the time. I agree. It's going to take a while for it to come down to consumer. It makes total sense where whoever has the most risk is the first and quickest adopters. For yourself, when you think about your career spanning cybersecurity, this is one of the things we always want to know about our guests as well. Have you always been interested in cybersecurity specifically, or did your original technical career take you on another path?
So I've always been interested in system software and hardware. Ever since I was a kid, and my career started as an academic. I was at the University of Cambridge running ran the systems research group there for a number of years, but I've always sort of liked being able to build or create new technology and then try and get people using it, and that's really been how my career has played out. With I guess Bromium was my fourth startup company that I'd had. So I've built a lot of systems over time where it turned out that security was critical to the to the system being useful. And so now for a lot of my career, it's really been looking at how can we build systems that stand the test of time, that can really be able to be difficult to be hacked. And there's a lot we've learned along the way as to how to do that, how to what techniques work, don't work, and how you go about architecting things to try and make them as secure as possible from the beginning.
What about when you were younger, before you got to school, before you got to Cambridge? Were you always into systems then, or was it something that you learned about while you were in college?
Yeah, I mean, I always like taking things apart and learning how they work, and as soon as I got my hands on a computer, I was interested in how it worked, what the split was between the hardware and the software, and and I think that's where there's a lot of interesting things that you can do on that hardware software divide, and that's really where I think there's a lot of opportunity going forwards to do more hardware helping secure the rest of the software stack. We're already seeing it in a number of areas. It's actually something I spent a lot of time thinking about. If one of the things I worked on at the university was a system called Xenoservers that with a number of students we built, and it's regarded as being the first infrastructure as a service cloud, and a key part of that was the Zen hypervisor. And obviously Zen is used as the core of Amazon AWS and and other public clouds. And we knew from the beginning that security was essential to that. We wanted to be able to have paying customers and for them to for the sensitive data to be safe. And we knew that not all of our customers were going to be fine, upstanding citizens. Some of them were going to be nefarious, trying to break into the system. So security was always absolutely key to the design of what we're doing there, and then went on to build other systems that are used for storing some of the most sensitive data held by governments and intelligence communities. And it's for those kind of systems where huge amounts of money being spent pen testing them, and that you really need to think about how to build security into the architecture to make sure that you've got these multiple layers and that it's a really architecturally robust approach.
No, that makes total sense. And you're talking about endpoint devices, and we know about HP Wolf Security, which secures endpoint solutions. You mentioned printers earlier in your conversation, and one of the things I was thinking about as you were talking about this hardware side of things is that we've had on our show different people in cybersecurity talk about how a lot of investment, of course, is made on the computer systems, but the reality is more and more devices rely on the internet as well, right? IoT, internet connected devices. We heard a horror story from Darktrace about someone's literal fish tank filter that was connected was actually they were able to drop something in there at a casino and capture the data of high rollers at a casino. And I was like, oh man, there's so many things to think about now because so many devices are connected. You're probably seeing similar things. When, I guess, how does your team approach it? How do you guys think about it? Because every device you ship that's connected to the internet obviously could be a potential vulnerability. And you were talking about just a moment ago, like how the hardware and the software have to come together in order to make these systems endpoints as secure as possible. How do you approach it? Do you treat every machine like the same, or is a computer one thing and a printer is another? How do you guys approach securing all these other endpoints?
Yeah, well, I think there's a trickle down, if you like, from PCs to printers to other IoT devices. Where for example, in our PCs, for about 8 years now, we've had some custom silicon which was created, something called the endpoint security controller, which you're now seeing similar concepts show up in mobile phones and things like that. But in the PC world, it's still unique, and that can really be the hardware root of trust. And you can then build everything off that, and having this sort of dedicated piece of hardware that you can rely on and use it to monitor other parts of the system and be able to repair them. And that's kind of critical in this, and that you need to be able to update the complex firmware that runs on these systems. Something like a printer is doing a lot of very complex stuff. You're going to need to continually update that. Be able to do that in a secure fashion. Know that you're always going from one official version to the next official version. That that it hasn't been tampered with. That you can monitor that and check that every time the system starts up. And then if you do find anything wrong, be able to get back to a known good state. And hardware can help with that. And those same chips now, which started off in PCs, same custom silicon is used in the printers too, and flow down to other IoT devices, perhaps in a simpler form over time. But the techniques as to how to do this sort of thing are understood. It's we really a lot the trouble in IoT is that a lot of the rush has been just to connect things to the internet and make them work, and not enough thought has gone into how to secure it. And we're now seeing the next wave of that, where people are taking this stuff more seriously. But there's a lot of old devices out there that are going to be a problem.
Yeah, well, we totally agree with that. I got to ask, this is a question separate from work. Do you personally have a lot of IoT devices?
I do. Got a bunch of things around the home, but I also segment them off onto a different virtual network, different VLAN. So they're not sharing the network with anything that I actually care about. And I do pay attention to who I'm buying the device from and whether I think that they've taken security seriously. And I probably wouldn't buy a random thing off off eBay or Alibaba and plug it into my network. I want to know a bit about
it. I agree. If you see something on like wish.com that connects to the internet, just be worried. All right. Ian, I want to say thank you for joining us today on IT Visionaries. Thanks for sharing your experience and your story and some of the things you're working on at HP. But before you go, it is time for the lightning round. The lightning round is brought to us by Salesforce Platform, the #1 cloud platform for digital transformation of every experience. Ian, this is where we ask you questions outside of the world of work. We kind of already got started, but outside of the world of work, so our audience can get to know you a little bit better. Are you ready?
Okay.
Give us an idea. What do you like to do for fun? Because security, we've kind of got a stereotype at the IT Visionaries audience has a stereotype of security people that they're a little bit worrywart. What do you do for fun to kick back and relax? You definitely have a lot of things you have to think about on a daily basis, and when you don't want to think about those things, what do you do?
I actually like learning new physical skills. Not getting great at them, but just being competent at them. So, like in the last year, I've tried to learn to surf and clay pigeon shoot.
Hey, I want to let you know I'm a surfer. Hey, listen, the problem with surfing is if you get good at it, you'll stop working. Surfing, you mentioned shooting clay pigeons. Sounds like you're a bit of an outdoorsman. What are some of the other physical skills you've learned over the years?
Oh, I don't know, windsurfing. I'll have a go at anything. Trying, kite surfing. I, used to row. Trying to learn to fly a helicopter. I just like learning new physical things. It's keeps it's always good to be learning, right?
Absolutely. So when you go on a vacation, I know like lately we haven't been going on vacations, but hopefully this reopens up pretty soon. When you go on vacations, what kind of places do you like to go? Do you like to go to like more natural places, or do you like going to visit cities and like check out cities?
These days I want to go somewhere where I can go surfing. That's I've got the bug at the moment. So,
you're there. Man, it sounds like you're crossing over. Where did you learn to surf?
In the Maldives.
Oh, come on, man. That's beautiful out there. Crystal clear water. If you guys don't know what the Maldives are, go check it out. It's beautiful, beautiful place. Very tropical. Okay, so if you surfed in the Maldives, that means you surfed most likely over a reef. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Have you ever cut your feet on the reef?
Yeah, doing the starfish when you fall off is key.
Yeah, the reef bites. The reef always bites. For those that are listening only, when you fall, you stick your arms and legs out like a starfish, so you sink as little as possible, so that you don't get cut up. Ocean reef is typically very sharp. Well, Ian, we'll have to get you ripping and take you. Last question, I guess, are you a goofy foot or a natural foot?
I'm left foot forward, so regular.
Regular foot. Okay, so if you can, so there's two places that have long, long rights. One of my personal favorites is Las Flores in El Salvador. When it's going in the summer, you're talking about over maybe 300 meters. It's like minutes. You'll be on the way for more than a minute, just going top to bottom. And it's crazy because it's got one of the easiest entries. When you go paddle, it looks like it's steep, but it's not. It like just glides you right in. So if you ever can, check out Las Flores in El Salvador. I think you'll have a lot of fun, given that you're a regular foot.
Thanks for the tip.
Well, Ian, thanks for joining us today on IT Visionaries. Thanks for sharing what you're up to at HP and how you guys are securing endpoints. And thanks for also sharing a little bit about yourself as a surfer. Listen, that's the biggest challenge. When you get into surfing, you stop working as much. I'm just telling you, you just start chasing waves.
Well, I guess I'm lucky. We don't have too many beaches too close to Cambridge, so it's a holiday activity.
There you go. Your boss can rest confidently. Thanks for joining us today on IT Visionaries.
It's been fun. Thanks.